When I was 16, I went to radio as a stringer. And I thought, boy, this was a great setup because I could go to Yankee Stadium. So I wrote for credentials, and I got them. Bob Fischel, who was the PR director of the Yankees, sent me my credentials back in 1960. Yankees were playing Pittsburgh in a World Series. And I went in there and sat and talked to Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle and all those greats. I said, boy, I got to work for this ball club. Later on, I went to the radio in New York. I became a producer for Yankee baseball. And I got to be able to be in the clubhouse, be in the dugout. And boy, that was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I got to sit and listen to these guys. You don't talk, you listen. And they would tell stories about what they did in 1928 or 1930. And I decided I would apply for the job as the promotions director for the Yankees. And I had an inside track because I was producing their baseball. I got the job. And that's a great story because I interviewed 3 times with Gabe Paul, who was my mentor and my hero. Great Gabe Paul was probably one of the best minds in baseball. He's the guy that put the Cincinnati Reds together in 1975. Bench, Canseco, Concepcion, Rose. So when he came to the Yankees, he said to me, how bad do you want the job? I said, Gabe, how bad do you want the pennant? He said, the job's yours. So I had my inside track to the Yankees in 1975. I stayed 75, 76, 77, 78. And after the World Series in 78, I had a heart attack in the stadium. And I never went back. 75, I was director of promotions. And that's the famous story of the going to Shea Stadium. We were out of Yankee Stadium for 2 years. We were at Shea Stadium. And that's the great cannon fire when I brought in 2 75 millimeter cannons to commemorate the 200th birthday of the United States Army. And General William S. Borland standing at home plate. And it's been on video throughout YouTube all the time. And I looked and I said, the guns are too low. And he said, what are you talking about? Instead of facing over the fences, they were facing the fences. First shot went off, blew the center field wall down. And they fired all 21 guns, one at a time. And I thought I was gone, I was dead. But I did not know that George Steinbrenner hated the Mets. So when I went to the box to explain to him, he said, you did that to please me, didn't I? So I left. Oh, old-timers, Joe DiMaggio. I got be friendly with Joe because he would come out and throw a ball out at the stadium. He was a very, I can't use the word difficult, well, maybe I should. He's a very difficult man to work with because when Joe says something, he means it. In 1975, we were at Shea Stadium, and it was Old Timers Day. And Joe was there, and I said, now they're going to call your name. You go, just swing the bat. He said, I'm not going out there. It's 100 degrees. I said, Joe, these people have paid admission to see you. I'm not going. It's too hot. I said, why don't you just swing the bat a couple times and don't go out to the outfield? Well, he did that finally. And there were a couple of incidences when my heart was in my throat with him because he was Joe DiMaggio.
It's about your experience with him.
Elston was the first black Yankee. In 1961, maybe? I'm not sure of the date. Ellie was, do you ever see the batting donut that they use when they're swinging a bat?
Yes.
Elston invented that. The batting donut, for when you're in the batter's cage. Elston, he told me a great story. He sat the bench with Casey Stengel, and Casey did not know names. Just couldn't remember a name. Well, they were playing against Cleveland, and Elston was on the bench, and Casey said, hey, fella, grab a bat. And Elston thought he said, hey, Elston. So he got up and grabbed the bat, and Casey didn't want him, but he was too embarrassed to call him back, and Ellie went up to the plate and hit a home run, and that's how he got into the starting lineup. He would play with a weight belt on every day under his uniform. Catcher, with all that equipment, and he still play with a weight belt on. He died, unfortunately, with an over-enlarged heart, but I loved him. He was just a super nice guy. I've got so many pictures of him and I. Henry Kissinger was a Yankee fan, and he used to come to the stadium often, and he said to me, "Can you get me a Yankee jacket?" I said, "Mr. Secretary, I can do better than that." I put him in the dugout in uniform, and he watched the whole game from that. So if you ever saw Henry Kissinger said, "Who put you in the dugout in uniform?" That was something that, it was so important. That dugout was so important. It's not today. They don't even sit on the benches. Now they sit up on the gates. It's all totally different. I was sitting in the dugout one day. We were having a discussion, and it was discussion. Somebody said, "Nobody ever hit a ball out of Yankee Stadium." I said, "No, that's not true. There was a black ball player in the black leagues by the name of Josh Gibson. And Josh, who was an amazing ball player, hit a ball out of Yankee Stadium." And with that, I got a tap on my shoulder, and I turned around, and it was Ted Williams. And he said, "The kid's right." I couldn't talk. You want to hear a Yogi Berra story?
Sure.
Somebody handed me a picture one day of Yogi and Casey Stengel, a nice ethereal shot of the two of them. And they asked me would I take it down to the dugout and have Yogi sign it. So I went down to the dugout and I said, "You want it?" And he signed it. And I said to him, "When was the picture taken?" He said, "Before Stengel died." George Steinbrenner was probably, he reminds me of Donald Trump. Does not know the meaning of the word "no, you can't." Does not know it. George he ruled with intimidation, always. I've seen him I was fired 4 times because of circumstances. Billy Martin was fired 5. We would compare times. Well, I'll tell you, my secretary, wonderful lady, young girl, 20 years old. Her name was Kathy, and she was sensational. Well, she never got a raise. So I went into George's office, and I'd like to get a $20 a week raise for her. She'd been at the ball club 2 years. He said no. With the same breath, he turned around and he gave Mickey Mantle, Elston Howard, Whitey Ford, and Yogi $5,000 each and took them on a plane to Vegas. But he wouldn't give this girl a $20 a week raise. So it's unpredictable. The story about Ron is, I brought Ron up from this, when he was playing with West Haven. Ron was a great pitcher. So he came into the ball club, and he had the locker. As you walked into the clubhouse, his locker was the first locker on the right. Well, Billy didn't like him, so he didn't pitch him. And every time there was a reliever, he would ask for Sparky Lyle. Well, I walked in the clubhouse about 11 o'clock in the morning, and Ron Guidry is packing up his bag. He's leaving. He's going back to New Orleans. I said, "What's the matter?" He says, "I'm going," because they would play chess. Him and Dick Tidrow would play chess in the bullpen because they knew they weren't going to be called on. He said, "Well, I can't take this. I'm going back home." I said, "Let me talk to Gabe Paul." So I went up to Gabe and I said, "You're going to have a problem with Guidry because he wants to leave." He says, "Call him up." I went upstairs, got Ron, and Ron said to Gabe, "I'll make a bargain with you. If you put me in the starting lineup one time, if I don't fare well, pull me out. I'll never bother you again. If I do fare well, put me in the starting rotation." Well, he did fare well. He did, and the rest is history. He got into the starting rotation, and now he's a Hall of Famer. Great ball player. Thurman was an enigma. probably one of the best catchers ever in baseball. Brilliant. Unfortunately came to a bad end when he had a plane crash. But Thurman would just tease me. Thurman was was the captain of the Yankees. Lou Gehrig, Thurman Munson, Derek Jeter, the only 3 ball players ever to be captain of the Yankees. And they was the last captain. There was no more captain of the Yankees. Well, the story was when we started, the first pitch is 8:05 in the evening, and when they come out from the dugout, the catcher leads them out, which was Thurman. And then we have national anthem, first pitch, and that's how it goes. Well, I would cue Thurman to go out. This is on ABC's Wide World of Sports. Go out, I'd cue him, and he'd look at me and go, he wouldn't go. That's a full minute of network time. He drove me crazy, and he did it purposely. Finally, I said to him, I don't give it a rat's backside. And he stopped.
With Bobby Bonds.
Yes, Bobby came to us in 1975, along with Catfish. Bobby never made it to the extent that they expected of him, but because he was a great outfielder with the New York Giants, with the San Francisco Giants, I beg your pardon. And Old Timers Day, they had a father and son, so I got a uniform for his young son, who was then 12 years old, and his name was Barry Bonds. And Howard and Gabe Paul lived in the same apartment building. They were old friends. Howard, of course, was an institution. And Howard, off camera, is a great guy. Put him on camera and you got a problem. Anyhow, it was 1975, we were doing Shirt Day. And this is the first time in any baseball history that we did a double knit shirt. Before that, they were just polo shirts. So I had packed Shea Stadium. And I went up to the box afterwards, and you could see an empty seat. That's how packed it was. 50 some odd thousand people. And I was as pleased as punch. So I walked into the box with Gabe and Howard looked at me and said, Mr. Landers, I see a few empty seats up there. Obviously, you are not doing your job to perfection. I said, Howard, if I was perfect, I'd be you. Billy Martin, he's a legend in everybody's mind. Probably a spark plug. He was a fighter. He was a brooder. Well, when he came to the Yankees in 1975, I went down because I was afraid of him. And the reason why he was fired from the Texas Rangers was because he bit the earlobe off of the public relations director, who happened to be the son-in-law of the owner, Bob Short. So he was fired. Billy went to Detroit, brought them to a World Series, went to Minneapolis, brought them to a World Series, went to Oakland, brought them to a World Series. He went to the Yankees. This is the man. He lasted with us for 5 years, but brilliant mind. Well, I went downstairs the first day in his office, and I was afraid of him because he had a reputation of being a firebrand. And I said to him, my name is Barry Landers, blah, blah. He said, are you the go-to guy? I said, yeah, if you need something, let me know. He said to me, I need a refrigerator and a television set. That was 11 o'clock in the morning. By 2 o'clock, he had a refrigerator and a television set in his office. And in the years I worked with him, I never had a problem with him. Never. I started in the radio when I was 16 years old on a local radio station in New Jersey, doing the football scores on an FM station. Nobody had FM in those days. And then I graduated. There was one of the owners of the old radio station bought a new radio station. And he asked me if I wanted to do sports. So I became sports director of the station. which gave me access to one of the most important things in my life. I was 25 years old, and I had credentials for Yankee Stadium in the World Series in 1960. And that was the kid that was never allowed to go by the dugout, but now I had credentials to be on the field. And here they were, Maris, Mantle, all those guys, Yogi, and I was thrilled to death. These were my heroes. And I got to sit, and I got to go into the Yankee clubhouse. Well, later on, after a couple of summers of that, I was in New York at the time, going to Channel 11 to visit a friend of mine who was a cameraman there. And he said, they're looking for a writer. So I said, oh, I'm a writer. Big lie. I never wrote anything in my life. So I said to the producer, his name, the name escapes me, but he said, well, we'll hire you for a week. So I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, and he said, boy, you're terrible. He said, but you're good. You have a good personality. Well, that lasted for almost 4 years. And the shows I worked were Zacherle, the Ghoul for his ghoulish TV show, a guy by the name of Chuck McCann. I wrote for him. I wrote for the Three Stooges, Laurel and Hardy, all those children's shows for 4 years. And that was amazing because everybody came up to the studio in those years. The Three Stooges came up. Oh, they were not the original Three Stooges. And that's where I got introduced into music, because there was this group that came from England, not the Beatles. Beatles had already been here. There was a group that came into the studio, and they were ragtag. I mean, they were not really clean. And they were calling themselves the Rolling Stones. I was a floor manager at the time on TV, and I saw these guys come in. They had just got off the boat. Their hair looked terrible. They were not that clean, as far as I remember. And I went home and said to my wife, I saw this group today. God, were they shaggy. Later on, I got to hire the Rolling Stones when they really made it big for London Records. And I paid the Rolling Stones per concert $10,000 for 2 shows. Now, equating that what today is, they wouldn't get out of their chair for $10,000. So what happened was that the venue was down in Asbury Park, New Jersey at Convention Hall, which is where I did most of my stuff. And I produced the concerts. Well, the Stones were so huge, we didn't know how we were going to get them into the venue, because the crowds were just unbelievable. And that's the only group that you're afraid of, because they have a following that is not too seedy, like Anyhow, so we figured we'd bring them in by boat. So we brought them in off the pier by boat. We didn't bring them in the boardwalk at all, over there. And I walked and I was talking to them, and we were discussing what they were going to do and so on and so forth. And my son, who was then 11, who is now one of the top producers in music in Hollywood, he got to meet all these guys. I did the Stones four times in concert and never paid them more than $10,000. We were backstage, and the head of the venue was Bill Graham. Fillmore East then, but he was doing a lot of stuff in Newark with me, and I was at the big venue where our studios were. And when the Stones came in, they were very nonchalant. A lot of liquor, a lot of booze, and a lot of women. I don't know who they were, and frankly, I didn't care to ask. But one day, there's one concert. I was talking to them, and I looked out in the wings, and there were 2 girls climbing from the roof down a ladder into where they could get to the stones. That's those flat ladders that go against the wall. And here they are climbing down there. So I got security, and I forget who went over with me, one of the stones. I forget who it was. But we were standing at the bottom of the ladder waiting for him to come down. He escorted them out. That's when Brian Jones was with him, I think. I used to work with Jack Hook, who was Dick Clark's road manager. And I would book Atlantic City for August and September. So this one particular year, Jack sent me the venue, the lineup for who I was going to have on the stage that year. It was for Labor Day weekend, Atlantic City. Well, I get the notice from Jack Hook as to who's going to be on there, and I looked and I said, "You're killing me." If I had paid $5,000 for that group of people. I called him on the phone. I said, "Jack, I got one group in here, only the people know," and that was Shirley and the Shirelles. The rest of them never heard of. He said, "Well, that's the way it is. You got to take it or leave it." Well, I had already given them a deposit, so I figured I'll go forward with it. That was probably in July.
What year?
1960. Well, I'll tell you who it was, and you'll know the year. So here's what I had on the show. Somebody I'd never heard of. I had two kids by the name of Sonny and Cher with a song called I Got You, Babe. I had Brian Hyland, Concrete and Clay. I had Tom Jones in What's New Pussycat. I had Mel Carter in Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me. We had 7 million record sellers on that show. 3 months before, I never heard of any of them. We sold out 2 shows. Now I'm going to tell you about the tickets. For all these things, the tickets, first 15 rows was $850. The rest of them were $550. So you can imagine what those tickets would be at a concert today, if you could get them. So when Zach and I did our show, we had to use somebody, I had the contacts.
What was the name of your show?
Disco Teen. Disco Teen with Zacherle was called. And we were at Channel 47 in New York. And we have had reunions on that show with the girls and the kids that were on that show. How many years ago?
91.
91. So that was in 1963, 1991. These 15-year-old girls were in their 50s, 60s.
Can you tell us kind of what was that show like? What was it?
Just a band. It was a dance show. It was patterned after what's his name? American Bandstand. There were same, except Zacherle had his own following of ghoulish people.
And tell us, Zacherle was
his real name is John Zacherle, and the last time we talked to him, which is, he's now 98, 96, still alive and still living in New York.
And what did he do?
He used to host a show called Chiller Theater, and it was syndicated nationally, and he'd do these old horror shows and make fun of them. He was a big hit. He was in movies. He was the cool ghoul. Well, take his makeup off, you wouldn't know who it was. But when he put that makeup on, it was...
And how did you meet him?
I worked with him at Channel 11. He had his own show called Zacherle at Large, and I was doing the other shows with the Three Stooges and the Merry Mailman, and we did almost 4 years of that. This young girl I used to write for, she came to the studio. She was 18 years old, and I had to write her comedy skits. Well, she was pretty good. She was funny, very pretty, and the first time she did a bit on TV, she said, took a jump rope, she put it around her neck, and she said, "Look, kids, look what you can do with that." I panicked. I ran over and I pushed her off the set. That young girl name was Joni Rivers. And Joni and I used to go down to a place in the village at night called Nobody's. It was right next to the bitter end. and she was doing a show she was in a group called the Giesenslaw Brothers, and she was the very funny young lady, very pretty, very smart, and we go over and have a beer and eat the leftovers, whatever they hadn't served in the Chinese restaurants, because that's how we lived, because they were 75 cents if you could eat all the leftovers. Not what they left on their plates, but they just didn't serve in the pots. And that's how we lived in those days in the village. And things just kept happening and happening and happening. That's when when I got over to Channel 47, I was also a floor manager and just a producer. So one of my big thrills was to be the floor manager for Pete Seeger. And we did 138 Pete Seeger shows.
Now, what was the name of your show? And
it was called Rainbow Quest, and it was syndicated on PBS to every station in the country. Pete was probably one of the godfathers of I can't say rock and roll, but it was
folk.
Yeah, I think it was folk. Pete wrote If I Had a Hammer. He wrote Where Have All the Flowers Gone. He wrote all those shows. He wrote We Shall Overcome. And Pete would bring these guests on, unbelievable guests. I got to work on the floor with these people, guys like Johnny Cash, guys like Donovan.
You have any stories about Johnny Cash?
He was just mean. He had just gotten out of prison, and he came in with his wife, and she was very pretty, June Carter, and I was the floor manager, and I'm from here to you, from them, and he wasn't liking anybody around her. He was very, very protective of her, and he sang his. I forget what songs he sang, but I was okay. It was okay. We did a show on Saturday mornings. I produced this one. Did a show on Saturday mornings with trivia, and this was a major New York radio station, WMCA radio. So my guest would be on that show, and I remember vividly, her name was Herbert Quarry. And Mr. Quarry was about 61 or 62. He was an expert in music. He knew every band that you could ever think of. His stage name was Tiny Tim. And Tiny and I became very good friends. And I got to tell you something about Tiny. He was a gentle, gentle soul. I never heard him use any profanity at all. I thought maybe I was going to catch him sleeping one day and he'd say something profane. Never. And he would call me Mr. Barry. Well, Mr. Barry, we're going to do this. And then my guy on sports was Marv Albert. Marv was the trivia expert on sports. And then I forget who the other one was, another producer. Oh, his name was, I forget his name, pardon me, but he produced a thing called the Mickey Mouse Club. So he was my expert in movies. I was working for J. Waller Thompson at the time, and J. Waller Thompson, the largest ad agency in the world. I was creative in there, and they were doing a thing called the Highway Safety Foundation out of Ohio, and their spokesperson was Sammy Davis. Well, they were going to do this telethon, and they asked if I would participate by helping out. I said sure. Wound up as associate producer and the floor manager, which means I'm as close to Sammy as you are. And Sammy was absolutely fantastic. One night, I was looking in the back of the theater. Everybody came on. Everybody came on. I could name Muhammad Ali and everybody.
Name some names. Who came on? Can you remember?
Oh, Lord. I can't think of their names.
You said Muhammad Ali?
Muhammad Ali come on. Joe Frazier came on. But just sitting in the back was Pearl Bailey. And because her husband was the drummer. And I said to Sammy, I said, Pearl Bailey's in the back. He said, get her. So I went and got her and told her Sammy wanted to. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, she came on with him. And they did 45 minutes of impromptu songs about love. Love, you're driving me crazy. Love, love, hooray for love. Love is a song and dance. Nobody recorded it. This absolute brilliant performance between these two people. A cappella, no band. One night, Sammy we had a big pot on the stage, big, huge bowl. People would come up and drop money in for the Highway Safety Foundation. Well, thought I got real smart, so I got a hold of the money and took it over to the bank and put it in the night depository. And during the break, Sammy said to me, "Where's the money in the bowl?" I said, "I took it over to the bank." He said, "Get it." This is like 1 o'clock in the morning. I said, "Sammy," he said, "get it or I'm not going back on." So I went and had to get the president of the bank to open that safe depository, get the money back and put it in the bowl. Because he said, if people see money in the bowl, they'll give. It's like salting the mine. We decided we were going to go to Woodstock. It was on a Thursday. We drove up, and Woodstock was not at Woodstock, by the way. It was at White Lake, because Woodstock would not let them be at Woodstock. And they were afraid of the people and what kind of crowd they were going to draw. So Max Yazger, who had a farm up there, rented them the property. We drove up on a Thursday, and the traffic was so backed up we couldn't get in. So we drove to Grossinger's, which was the big Borscht Belt hotel. And I used to work with them doing their teen shows. So we stayed at Grossinger's, and strangely enough, all the groups that were playing at Woodstock were staying at the same hotel. And they had us in a big room with cots. And my son, we couldn't get over to Woodstock because it was just impossible traffic-wise. My son, my son is one of the biggest music producers in Hollywood today, as we speak. He was about 12 years old. He came into the bedroom. He said, "Come on, we're going over to see Woodstock." I said, "How are we going to go?" He said, "I got a helicopter." I said, "What do you mean you got a helicopter?" He met this woman and told him who their father was one of the producers, which was not true. She rented a helicopter, and we all went over to Woodstock in the chopper and spent 2 days over there going back and forth. And you know who opened Woodstock?
Your good buddy.
Richie Havens opened Woodstock. Richie told a story. They kept saying, keep playing, keep playing. He was weary. All he kept, handsome Johnny, because the other act hadn't shown up yet. He was on stage for like almost 45 minutes, which is a long time to play. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and they did.
They were right next to you?
They were in the same room. We were all in the same room. There were cots. It was like a barracks. That's where they put us up. And Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young. What's her name? Janis Joplin. All the groups, like, you know how many groups there were? Big Brother and the Holding Company. I can't think of all of them, but we all just milled and mingled around. Kids loved it. They just loved it. They did, we were sitting on the bed listening to these guys playing Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, which has one of my favorite songs. And their harmony, a cappella, was so tight, it was unbelievable. On our show with Zacherle, we introduced a song called Light My Fire with a group that came in called The Doors. And they were big in California, but they never heard of in New York. All I could think of, I was the floor manager and producer on the floor with my cameraman and all these people, and all I could think of was Jim Morrison coming up to the camera lens and licking it. And I wanted to punch him in the mouth. He was gross. He thought that was funny. Should I end this with what I say on my radio show? Join me next time. We'll sit down alongside the tracks, open up a can of beans, watch the trains go by, and talk about this crazy world in which we live. Thank you very much.